Hello, and welcome to Sobercast, where we provide AA speaker meetings and workshops in podcast format. We're an ad-free podcast, and if you enjoy listening, please help us be self-supporting by visiting Sobercast.com, look for the donate link, and drop $1 or $2 into our virtual basket. We hope you enjoy the podcast. Have a great day.
I'm Diana D., Lake Charles, Louisiana. How is everybody tonight? And I am an alcoholic. True and blue. Wow, such an honor and a privilege to be here or to be anywhere, for that matter. I was about this far from death when I got in these rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, for the second time. I want to take just a minute to thank all of you for coming tonight, and to thank Allison, because she's just a gem. And she leave me messages. I love the way you guys talk down here. I mean, I just get excited listening to you. And it was some phrase you used earlier, and I thought, oh wow, I got to take that back home with me. I know that I stand here tonight in a room of giants. From the newcomer that dragged theirself in here to the old timer that's been around here for 37 years, I am among giants, and I'm really grateful that I know that today, because there was a time where I didn't think you guys were giants at all. And I also want to take a minute to thank the folks that decorated and Donna and everybody that put this thing together. I know what a trick it is to pull one of these deals off every year, and so I know that behind the scenes everybody worked really hard. And I love being the kickoff speaker on Friday night, because after this I'm done and I get to go play with y'all all weekend. And those that missed the talk tonight, they won't be able to give me a hard time, and you guys will. So that's a great thing. When they asked me to come and speak for this Fourth Dimension conference, it blew me away. My home group is the South City group in Lake Charles, Louisiana, and if you ever get a chance to come that way, you'll always see Pete there. Pete came with me from Lake Charles. He's my backbone boy. That's what I call him. And I've moved about 13 times since I got sober, March 21st of 2000. And since then, God has had me on the journey that I couldn't wrap my mind around when I got here. I couldn't wrap my mind around anything. I didn't have one. So there was no wrapping my mind around nothing, because I couldn't find it. And I don't know how long it took you all for the fog to clear, but I'm not real sure the fog has cleared yet. And I spoke a couple of weekends ago in a little town in Colorado called Louisanna, Colorado. My father, who just celebrated 42 years of sobriety last April. He's coming on 43 years at Alcoholics Anonymous. And he had asked me to come and speak in Louisanna, Colorado, where I'm from, Colorado. And I went there to this little roundup and spoke. And in that room was an AA member that I remember from when I was 8 years old and my dad walked into Alcoholics Anonymous. And he was there to hear me speak. And I was like, no, I want to hear you speak, So I'm truly among giants here. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what it was like, and hopefully a whole lot more about what it's like now, because this is a rocket ride. My sponsor used to say, God bless her, Peg used to say, Diana, just hold on to your seat, because you're going for the rocket ride of your life. And that's why I asked Allison to read that, because when I read that in Bill's story about being rocketed into an existence I wouldn't understand, I thought, yeah, whatever. I don't know what that means, but today I live it and I love it. And I am so grateful that I didn't miss it. And so I'm a typical alcoholic and a real alcoholic. And I am also the mother of alcoholic sons, and the daughter of alcoholic parents, and the niece of alcoholic aunts and uncles, and the granddaughter of alcoholic grandparents, and probably the grandmother of alcoholic grandkids. My passion in Alcoholics Anonymous, I like to think it's, this big woohoo about everybody else, but let me tell you the truth. My passion about Alcoholics Anonymous has as much to do with y'all saving my dad's life, and then saving my life. And I have a son that's getting ready to celebrate 7 years in recovery. So 3 generations, God scooped down in His grace. and saved us all in very different ways, and brought us into these rooms where you all saved our lives. And so I walked up to a couple of young girls earlier, and I said, you're the future of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I said, you're going to be keeping these seats warm for my grandbabies. And, because that's probably the way it's going to be. Not many of us in my family escaped this disease, and I don't know where it came from, and none of that matters. What matters is what I'm going to do about it. And so when I crawled in these rooms in 2000, I'll just give you a little hint about my last drunk, or what led up to my last drunk. My dad got sober when I was 8 years old, and he ran off into Alcoholics Anonymous. And the family stayed at home and suffered a great deal. My mother actually went into Al-Anon, but I think she was in the wrong program. She died of opiate addiction about 3 years ago. And we couldn't help her. We tried many, many times. God bless her soul. But and so so when my father walked into Alcoholics Anonymous, and y'all stole him, as far as I was concerned, and he became a fairly well-known circuit speaker. This is what we called him back then. I don't know what we call him now, but and he traveled all over speaking at AA conventions, much like this one. And many times we got to go and sit in the front row as children and listen to his story. And y'all thought his story was really funny, and I didn't think it was very funny. And I couldn't figure out what y'all were laughing about. Because, see, I lived through it. And yeah, he had a lot of really funny stories. Like the time my mother took the iron skillet and hit him. My dad's 6'5", my mom's 4'11", and she hit him, knocked him off the stairs, and he was out in the grass, passed out. Or the time I got up for breakfast and he was asleep under the table, where he'd attempted to commit suicide by cutting the tops of his hands. But you know what? I can look back at that stuff today and laugh with you guys. There was a time where I couldn't do that. And through the good sponsorship and good literature and working these steps and trying to do what this book laid out for me to do, I can laugh with you guys today. And I probably laugh, a little too much sometimes. But so that's how my first experience in Alcoholics Anonymous. When I started drinking, when I had my first drink when I was about 6 years old. And of course I didn't drink every day or drink anything like that, but I remember stealing some whiskey out of my grandmother owns a bar in Lamar, Colorado, and I used to help her clean that bar almost every day. And I stole whiskey, put it in a mason jar, and took it home in the backyard in the middle of summer. I remember it was really, really hot. Lamar, Colorado's down on the plains. My dad says nothing but cowboys and roughnecks there. And there's a few other people, but I remember being in the tumbleweeds. Well, when they die, they're tumbleweeds, but before that, they're green and they're tall. And I was short enough to duck down in those tumbleweeds and drink that whiskey. And all I remember is it was really, really warm. And so now I was one of those kind of drunks that they talk about. We were drunks before we were drunks, And I remember when I was probably 4 years old. We used to do the thing with the hyperventilating and you pass out. I don't know if y'all ever did that when you were kids, right? Your friend would squeeze you and you'd faint. Well, my friends and I all did that in my grandmother's basement one day, 3 of us, and they did it once and they were over it. I wanted to do it 40 times, and I was 4. So, yeah. So by the time I was 8 years old, and this is just part of my story, and I hope it doesn't offend anybody, but it is part of my story. I was huffing lighter fluid and paint and gas, and doing anything I could do to escape. And by the time I was 10, 11 years old, I was full-blown alcoholic. Progression didn't take long with me, because from the time I picked it up till the time I put it down, it was 100% a part of my life. And so 12 years old, I decided my dad was crazy and Alcoholics Anonymous now. And now my mother's stark raving mad. Because the better he got, the madder she got. And that's what happens when you don't treat the disease of alcoholism in your home. Because this is a family disease. And so 12 years old, I said, I've had all this insanity I'm going to take, and I hit the road running. Now, for the next 20 years or however long it was, that was my deal. If you grew up in a family like mine, you'd drink too, right? And my mother was the meanest Mexican ever come out of Colorado. And she's 4'11" and 100 pounds soaking wet and mean as she could be. And she was just out of control, and she used to beat us with vacuum cleaner hoses and extension cords, and I mean, she was not a nice woman. I'm at peace with that today, and I made amends to her and cleaned that up before she died. So that's another gift Alcoholics Anonymous gave me. So I hit the road running when I was 12 years old and lived on the streets in Boulder and hung out with the Vietnam vets coming out of Vietnam. They saved my life. They would build a fire when I was cold, and they would watch over me when I was sleeping under the bushes. And I didn't think anything was wrong. Oh, that was a great life. I was living a great life. I could drink when I wanted. I could get tongue chewing, knee wobbling drunk, and nobody'd beat me. And all that stuff, So I thought, oh, this is a great life. I walked into Alcoholics Anonymous. A lot of things happened. And I'll tell you a little bit about that and what it's like now. But I walked into Alcoholics Anonymous for the first time in 1984. I was 24 years old. And I said, you can talk to me about anything you want, but don't talk to me about this God thing. And I don't really need a sponsor because I'm sponsoring myself. And, cause after all, I know what's going on, right? When you're doing the things that I was doing at 8 years old in the crucial brain development stages, I don't think that's a very good idea. Just words from the wise. So for all those years, I blamed my family and my mother and everything else for my alcoholism, and it was this and it was that, and I was so mad at my dad. I can't believe he gave me alcoholism, and I mean, it was just all this crazy stuff going on in my head. And if I wasn't beat as a child, I wouldn't, blah, blah, blah. Guess what I learned in this book the second time around? I learned that the only reason I'm an alcoholic is because I really, really, really like to get drunk. I like the effects produced by alcohol. Hello. My middle sister, she's not a drunk. Dad didn't give that to her, whatever. But I learned that in my first inventory in 2000. So I came to Alcoholics Anonymous in 2004. I didn't get a sponsor, didn't work the steps. And by 8 years sober, I was the most miserable, suffering, crispy person you would ever want to meet. And I convinced myself, as the book says, by every form of self-deception and experimentation, I'll try to prove myself exception to the rule, therefore non-alcoholic. And I did that for the next 8 years. I went back out, and boy, it was rough. Just let me tell you, if you're thinking about it, don't do it. It's bad news. I came crawling back in these rooms in the year 2000 on my deathbed. And I had lost everything that was ever important to me. This disease had taken everything. But the most important thing it took was my integrity and my soul. It took my kids, it took husbands, cars, families, jobs, everything. Wiped it all out. I walked back in these rooms, I crawled back in these rooms in March of 2000. I was on a suicide mission that weekend. It was St. Patty's Day weekend. My son, the one that's now sober, was living with me and partying with me. Both of my sons were, my older sons. Not proud of that. I'm a woman, that's what happened, and I tell the truth up here. And he got up that morning and he shook me and he said, Mom, I have a dad that's a crazy drunk and I have a mom that's a crazy drunk too. Boy, you don't want to hear that coming out of your kid's mouth, I'll tell you that. So I packed a bag and I headed for Lamar, Colorado. Now I lived in the mountains of Colorado. I was a honky-tonk queen in Colorado. Or at least I thought I was. I was about 100 pounds soaking wet. I couldn't put two sentences together. But boy, did I think I was hot. And one of the things it talks about in this book is that, we have a disease of perception. Boy, do we ever. So that, that's really what I thought. But I headed for Lamar. I decided I was going to kill myself. Now, in all those 8 years, I was back out there drinking. I drank myself through a divorce and many jobs. My kids wouldn't talk to me anymore, none of that. Not once did it dawn on me that alcohol was my problem. I grew up in these rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I had been here for 8 years before, from the time I started drinking until the time I ended up in that jail cell for the last time. Not once did it occur to me that alcohol was what was causing all the problems in my life. Talk about an whoa! Are you okay? Somebody fell out of the chair. I ain't seen that in a while, no. Sorry. Are you okay? No, I mean really. We need to call EMTs or anything? All right, good deal. Yeah. Get sober, fall out of the chair, no problem. I used to say that about getting drunk. So anyway, I was on a suicide mission that week, and I decided it was time to kill myself. And as I said, it never dawned on me that alcoholism was my problem. I thought it was everybody else. There's a line in the book that struck me hard when I finally was able to read it. It said to blame others is as far as most of us ever got. It's talking about me. So I crawled back in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I got arrested, my second DUI in 6 weeks. I was on the verge of homelessness. I was unemployable, and I was destitute. My kids wouldn't talk to me except for to call me blankety blank. You can't say that from up here. It wasn't pretty. And so they got me out of jail. And at first I wouldn't even get out of jail. I just told them, leave me alone. I just want to die. Just leave me alone. Well, finally, I agreed to get out of jail so I could go smoke a cigarette. That's the only reason I'm alive. I'm telling you. I hate to say that, but it's true. My sister said, I know you're dying for a cigarette. If you just agree to go to treatment like this judge wants you to, we can go out and smoke. I was like, yeah, you're right. Brilliant. So I signed myself out to go to treatment so I could go smoke. And I went directly to the bar. And of course, for the next couple of days, I drank myself into oblivion. My kids poured me on an airplane, literally. And I ended up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where a lady was chasing me through the airport, and I didn't know what town I was in. And she's going, are you Diana? Are you Diana? And I'm like, yeah, where am I? And she took me out to this treatment center called New Beginnings at Waverly. And there I began the journey to get well. And I didn't do any of that. The grace of God scooped me up and planted me exactly where I needed to be planted, and He continues to do that today. So, now while I was in that treatment center, this little kid named Josh was there with me, and he was the same age as my middle son, the one who had shook me and told me, how much he hated me and that I was a crazy drunk. And so I really latched on to Josh because you know how regretful and remorseful and all that stuff is just burying us. And I couldn't stop crying. I could not stop crying. And Josh would say, don't forget to feel the joy. I was like, what joy, you idiot. Anyway, his mother came to visit him at that treatment center. And I was outside smoking. Now, my dad had just bought that treatment center, put a deal together with some folks to buy that treatment center about 3 weeks before I went there. And I was as far from going to treatment as he was from buying that treatment center 3 weeks before that. And it just, things folded out, and there it was. And there I was, and it was just bizarre. It was God. It was God. So in that treatment center, this lady comes out, and I'm on the porch smoking. And, I'd run around that treatment center and say, my dad owns this place. I'll smoke anywhere I want. I mean, I was really out of control. I have to admit, I was a wreck, train wreck. And I used to run around there with my negligee on that was about 4 sizes too big. I didn't know my name. Running around the halls smoking with everything hanging out. I mean, it was a train wreck. But they got me under control finally after about 11 days in the Shake Shack. I got to come out of the Shake Shack. So, there was about 7 of us in that treatment center together that had a period of sobriety, that had never worked these steps, didn't get sponsors, and didn't do the deal. And we were all sitting there going, this treatment center didn't have a whole lot to do with the big book and stuff. I mean, they introduced you to it and whatever. And so that group of us got down with this book at the table, and we started reading it and just fighting for our lives desperately. And the only thing that gave us the willingness to do that was the grace of God, because none of us were very willing when we arrived. So Peg is my sponsor, and she lives in St. Francis, Minnesota. And she saved my life. But at the treatment center, she came outside, and I didn't know who she was. She said, I know you. I said, you don't know me. I'm from Colorado, and maybe, I'm from the mountains. And she said, no, I know you. I used to be just like you. I went, who is that crazy woman? Because I still had the perception that y'all were crazy in here. I didn't like any of you. I thought you're all liars, and I thought y'all were idiots, and, all that stuff. Skewed perception that I have. And so she went, and I didn't see her again. So I got out of treatment, and I ran back to Colorado. I packed everything I owned in my car and a U-Haul truck, and headed back to Minnesota as fast as I could. And everybody's like, oh my God, I can't believe you're doing that. I had $200 to my name. And I said, well, why are you going to Minnesota? My family said, because it's the only place I know anybody sober. And I knew if I went back to those mountains of Colorado, the honky-tonk queen I was, that I would be dead in a minute. And somehow I knew that. I know how I knew that now. I don't know how I knew that then, but, and so I headed to Minnesota and I wrecked my car the day I got there, and Josh came to pick me up in downtown Minneapolis. I was looking for a crack hotel. Now, I don't use crack, never have, I don't think, that I can remember. Anyway, I mean, if I have, I don't recall. They don't have that in the mountains of Colorado. The cowboys all live up there. And I was a honky-tonk queen, and I was married to a really good-looking cowboy, so I had to play that role. And so, but I knew crack hotels were cheap because somebody had told me that. And so I'm in downtown Minneapolis looking for a cheap crack hotel, and I got about 4 days worth of money, and that's it. I didn't have a clue what I was going to do. I was about 27 days sober, crispy, soaking wet, just a mess. And Josh came and got me. And he said, come on, let's go over to the Friday Night Fridley group and go to a meeting. I said, okay, let's do that. So we went over there, and in the parking lot was that woman again. And she said, and she was Josh's mom, and she said, why don't you come and stay with us for a while? I said, I couldn't do that. I couldn't impose, I'm a honky-tonk queen, don't you know? I could do anything. I was so messed up. And so finally, after about the 8th time they asked me, I agreed to go spend the night. I arrived at Peg's house. She was a single mom. I was a single mom. She had 3 boys. I had 3 boys. She left home when she was 12. I left home when I was 12. She ran the streets of Minneapolis. I ran the streets of Denver. And I didn't know any of that about her when I got there. And when I arrived at her house, I had a car that wasn't insured, no driver's license, a loaded .38 special under the front seat, and I had everything I could get in a king-size sheet tied together at the 4 corners. I drug that up her stairs, and I stayed 6 months. And she saved my life. She sat down with this book, and she took me. I get teary-eyed because I'm so grateful for the women in these rooms that saved my life. And that woman that has 30 years or 32 years or whatever, I mean, all that tells me is that I don't ever have to drink again. And boy, I need to know that all the time. I need to remember that every minute of every day because I know how insidious this disease is. I know now. It scares me to death some days. And so Peg began to take me through this book. And Peg is a very religious woman, thank God. And her husband committed suicide at 10 years sober in Alcoholics Anonymous because he wouldn't get a sponsor. He wouldn't work the steps. He was married to a AA member, and he knew he couldn't drink. And he blew his head off across the street from their house. I came into Peg's life about the time that she had dodged out of AA. And somehow I arrived there and drug her back in. And she drug me through this work. And she took me to a God of my own understanding. When I got here, I couldn't say the word God. I couldn't say the 3rd step prayer. I couldn't say the Lord's Prayer. I couldn't say, the Serenity Prayer. I couldn't say any of it. I didn't know if there was a God. All I knew if there was one, I didn't know anything about it, and he didn't know anything about me. And so So Peg said, Diana, if you had a God, what would he be? And I said, well, he'd be, have a beard and cowboy boots and a big, he would be a mountain nomad kind of guy. And so she had this statue that somebody had given her at the top of her stairs, of one of those nomad kind of statues with the long beard and kind of Jesus Christ looking, I guess you would describe it. And I said, well, I guess if I had a God, he'd kind of look like that. And so she said, okay, well, what would you call him? I said, well, I think we ought to call him El Honcho Grande, the Big Daddy. And she said, okay, that'll work, and that's how I started the spiritual journey. I couldn't say the word God. I didn't know what it meant, and I didn't know anything about it. And so El Honcho Grande and I, we went on road trips. We did all kinds of stuff. We still do, by the way. I have to tell you, I came to Mississippi last Friday. Don't laugh. I thought the convention was last weekend. So, and Allison was gracious enough not to tease me about that when she introduced me. The fact is, I'm cruising down here last Friday, and I get to the Mississippi line, and I'm excited. The 4th Dimension, I got goosebumps. I'm ready to rocket ride, baby. I'm just going. I call her, I'm like, I just passed the Mississippi line. I'm all excited. And she calls me back. I got her voicemail. I left this big old, voicemail. She calls me back. She goes, Miss Diana. I love the way you guys talk down here. Miss Diana, it's next Friday. I'm like, oh my God. I told you I did some stuff during early brain development that really messed some stuff up there. So I even considered staying the whole week. I love you guys so much. I'm like, well, maybe I just ought to camp out here for the week. But anyway, where was I? I got off track. Before I speak, I say, God, you're on. Your word's not mine. I know the only reason I'm alive is because God wants to use my lips. That's it. There's no other reason. I know what I'm doing on this earth today, thanks to you people. I didn't know what I was doing here before. I was just wandering aimlessly in the night. And so Peg took me through this work and I had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. Who would have thunk it? El Honcho Grande? And me? Yeah, I did. I did and have and continue to have a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps and you people and what I get to see here. And so, there's a couple of lines in the big book that I just love it talks about the idea that when we unreservedly put ourselves in God's hands and we try to be who God would want us be, not what God would want me to do, but what does he want me to be? Who does he want me to be? Today I know who he wants me to be. I have an idea. I sure don't know it all. I probably know about that little bit of it. But, and you probably ought to be hearing from that guy with 37 years or that woman with 32 years. I know they know a lot more about practicing the principles than I do. But, I gotta tell you a funny story. When I got here, and I did my first 4-step, what I learned was that I didn't leave home because my mom was crazy, mean, and all those things, although she was. I left home because I wanted to get drunk, and she kept beating me every time I came home drunk. Well, I got to tell you, I had 3 kids, and she used to say, Diana, one of these days it's going to come back to you threefold. Guess what? I got 3 boys. Guess what? They all got it. They all got it. And it's kind of exciting. I hate to say it that way, but if they find this deal, they know where to go when they're ready to get here. They know exactly what to do because I have tried really, really hard to lead by example since I've been here. Because I can't save them. You guys can, though. You guys can save them, and I can't. And so I come to you guys for that. And I get my passion from knowing that someday my grandkids are going to walk in these rooms and there's going to be people like Allison and Pete and the man with 37 years and the newcomer and whoever fell out of the chair back there and we all laughed. There's going to be people like you here to love them back to some semblance of a life. And, boy, I just can't even tell you how grateful I am about that. Sometimes I feel like I'm an AA cheerleader. You ever, in your home group, you got that woman that just won't shut up and she's so dang excited about sobriety that you just want to slap her some days when you're having a bad day? Well, I'm that cheerleader. Because I owe my life, my family's life to you folks. And without you, none of us would be here. My dad was dead at 29 years old from the disease of alcoholism in a hospital in the DTs for the last time when he was 29. And you guys brought him back to health and wellness and love. And we've figured out how to clean all that stuff up the best we can. I want to move on, I think, into what's going on in my life now because you wouldn't believe it. You just won't believe it. I walked out of that treatment center 11 years ago and they told me I better not ever try to work again, because I was crazy. And that if I didn't take this medication, shut up and sit down in the back of the room, maybe I wouldn't cry and maybe I wouldn't die and maybe I wouldn't end up in a psych ward. And so when I walked out of that treatment center, the prognosis was guarded at best. And I didn't think I had a fighting chance in hell of doing this deal. What an order, I can't go through with it. Whew, that's an understatement. That's what I thought. And here I am today just with this amazing life. I remember that when I was early sober. This is how my spiritual experiences looked when I was early sober. I didn't have a driver's license. I had warrants out for my arrest in Colorado. I was facing 5 years in prison for growing some stuff in the mountains you're not supposed to grow in the mountains, and or anywhere for that matter. But anyway, so I was facing 5 years mandatory prison, 2 DUIs, a divorce, my kids, everything was just a mess. And so I'm driving down the road every day to the meeting that was 45 minutes away from Peg's house. She lived out in the country. And I would pray when I got in the car, God, please don't let me get pulled over. I'm going to go to prison, you know. I can't go to prison sober. I mean, that's what it really looked like. One day, I'm going through Buffalo, Minnesota, and I get pulled over for speeding. And I'm talking to the cop, and I'm telling the cop, yeah, I got a driver's license. No, I don't have a driver's license. You know, I find this thing about honesty when you get sober, you know, how do you continue to do all that stuff and be honest? You can't. So this cop, I said, this thought comes through my mind, and I'm rocking and praying and crying, and I'm about maybe 48 days sober or something. And I'm rocking and praying, God, I can't go to prison sober. I can't go to prison sober. I mean, I was just scared to death. And this thought came through my mind. Maybe that cop's radio will be too busy and he can't call you in. Now, I don't know where that thought came from. I didn't even know that. Well, I'm waiting. It's 15 minutes. I'm still waiting. I'm sweating. I'm crying. I got Peg on the phone, you know. And the cop comes walking up to my window and he said, the radios are really busy today. I can't call you in. I'm going to go ahead and let you go to your meeting. I'm like, that was my first spiritual experience, I hate to tell you. I mean, the first one I could identify. There were many before that, but I didn't know it then. And things like that happened. A couple months later, Peg said, you know, Diane, there's this international convention going to be in Minneapolis here in a month, and I want you to do service at that international. I'm like, you're right. She said, I got you at one of the doors. She did, and I was there, and it dropped me to my knees when I heard 100,000 people say the Serenity Prayer in one room. I went to my knees. I couldn't believe. I didn't sleep all weekend. I was at the Minneapolis Convention International in 2000, and I didn't sleep all weekend. I was running and going, and they had a sex meeting at 3 a.m. And let me tell you how many people were at that meeting. It was funny. My dad and I got to go to the International in San Antonio in July together. And he was in one of those little roller scooter things because he hadn't treated himself so well. So he's, you know, having a hard time getting around in his older age. And he was racing Bobby B from Lafayette and my sponsors from Florida. And they were all in these little cars running all over the International. We had a blast. If you'd have told me that was going to happen 11 years ago, I'd have told you were stark raving mad, you know. So at about a little over 6 months or so sober, I crashed that car, totaled it. A lady pulled out in front of me on the highway. I knew I was going to kill her. I couldn't stop. I mean, she was right there, and I plowed into her. She was about 80 years old. And the cops came. They put the handcuffs on me, put me in the backseat of the car, and I knew I was going to prison. And, cause a mandatory prison sentence, right? And so, I'm rocking and praying in the back seat. Peg gets there to get the car, you know, and she's trying to help me however she can. And the cop comes around and opens the back door and pulls me out of there and undoes the handcuffs. And he says, Colorado doesn't want to extradite you, and I'm going to let you go. I'm like, wow. So finally, at about 9 months sober, I got enough courage to try to clean up that mess. And I set a court date in Lamar, Colorado. In Fairplay, Colorado is where those charges were held. My son called me about 2 days before I was supposed to be in court, and he knew what was going on. He said, Mom, did you burn the courthouse down last night? I said, no, I didn't burn he said, the courthouse burnt down last night, and I think you did it. And I said, Randy, I'm in Minnesota. I don't catch my flight for 2 days. I did not burn the courthouse down. Did you hire somebody to burn, you know? I'm like, no, I'm not kidding you. The courthouse burned down. And so I had to call and rearrange everything, and I flew in a little bit later. And I'm going through the mountains of Colorado where I was a honky-tonk queen, and I'm flooded with all these memories, and I'm about 9 months sober, and I am a train wreck. And I'm going to prison. Peg said, Diana, if you go to prison, then God wants you there for a reason. And I'm like, yeah, that's easy for you to say. You know, and she said, either you're supposed to write a book or there's somebody in there you're supposed to help. Because by this time I'd already done my step work. She heard my story. She knew who I was. And she said, you know, maybe there's somebody in there you're supposed to help. And I'm like, yeah, easy for you to say. So I get there to Fairplay, Colorado, and they had set up a temporary trailer. And that's where court was held. And I walked into that courtroom, and the judge that was supposed to hear my case was held over in another trial, the criminal judge. And I had to go before the traffic judge. He didn't know anything about mandatory sentencing. I told him my story, a little bit of it, as tears were running down my face. And he calls the DA on the phone, and we have an open discussion in court about me. And the judge says, I want you to go back to Minnesota and keep doing what you're doing. And he let me walk out of that courtroom. Now, I come to find out the DA who I'd been talking to trying to get all this arranged was 14 years sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. Yeah. So, that's the kind of miracles we get to do here. That's just a little piece of it. I mean, that's just the first 6 months of my sobriety, or 9 months. 9 months sober, Peg said, "Nan, why don't you go to college?" I'm like, Peg, I didn't get through junior high. Don't you remember? Don't you remember my story? I didn't get through junior high. I did a little of 7th, a little of 8th, a little of 9th. You know how we do. And she said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And I said, "Well, I think I wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer, as near as I can remember, but I think it was a lawyer." And she said, "Well, why don't you go down there to the college and check it out?" And I said, "Peg, I can't." She said, "Just go." I said, "All right, I'm going on a wing and a prayer. Here we go again." So 2 weeks later, I'm starting college. Now, so that kind of stuff is all God. I mean, that's only grace. That's only grace. I went through college with a 3.98 GPA, got a bachelor's degree in psychology. I was going for my MBA, and accounting made me switch majors. If you've ever been in accounting, somebody who thinks like me, we can't put numbers backwards and in minus spots and things. I just wanted to slap my teacher all the time. And so I decided to switch my major. So, when I was sober the first time in 1984, I decided I was going to be an adolescent counselor, and I got into the field of treating alcoholism and addiction, and I did that for 6 of those 8 years I was sober. And so you'd think I'd have known something about alcoholism. It might have dawned on me all those problems I was having was a result of alcoholism, but I didn't think that. And so, and I knew I didn't want to go back into the field of alcoholism. Absolutely not. I wasn't doing it, blah, blah, blah. Well, God always has different ideas about that stuff. And doesn't he? And so I was dating a guy. He convinced me to take a job at a mental health center in Bradenton, Florida. I had now moved to Florida. And man meets woman on AA campus. You remember that story? Well, I didn't listen to that story very well. But I didn't have my first date till I was 18 months sober, I want you to know. I didn't have my first date because I was scared to death of men. I was afraid to turn on my radio. I thought country music would make me drink. I was afraid to put on my cowboy boots. I didn't know what was going to get me. I was scared to death. And so off to Florida, I went to work in this mental health center. And this guy convinced me to go get that job, this AA guy I was going to marry. Convinced me. I said, I told you I'm never going back in the field. I'm not doing that. Well, I got the job. The lady that hired me was in the AA meeting at noon the day before. And I had a caseload of 32 schizophrenic alcoholic crack addicts. And my job was to help them learn how to live. I'm like, well, I ought to be able to do that. I can certainly identify with all of them. And I had more than 32. There must have been about 132. But what a wonderful experience to be able to do that. What I learned there was something really, really important, and God knew I needed to learn. Because when I left that treatment center and they told me I was crazy and all that stuff, I was always afraid I was going to go off the deep end and something was going to happen and I was going to drink. Or go psychotic or something. I didn't know. Because the psychiatrist told me I was certainly going to go psychotic if I went off that medication. So I told all my AA friends, you guys watch me because I'm going to stop taking this stuff. And if I go wacko, get me to the psych ward, because I didn't know what was going to happen. And so I got the privilege and honor of going to Florida and working with those mentally ill people. And I got to see what mental illness looks like. And it didn't look like me. And I know that's why God sent me there. I just know that's why. And so, anyway, I got my degree and headed on my way, and it's been a wild ride. I want to know how many people in this room, I know I saw some sit down, that have less than a year's sobriety. Because I want you just to reflect about where you're at right now. In 3 years, I want you to look back at your life, and you'll just go, wow. You just can't imagine what's going to happen. Peter M. out of New Jersey, Union, New Jersey, is a friend of mine, and I haven't seen him in a long time. But he used to say something to me and to anybody. He did a lot of workshops, and he said to me one time, I was talking to him about amends. And I said, I got this guy on my amends list, blah, blah, blah. And I don't really think I need to clean it up because I can't find him. God doesn't seem to be following that path with me. And he said, Diana, how free do you want to be? I want to be free, and I am free. So I'm going to tell you just what happened this summer. I don't know how much time I got left, but I'm all right. So this summer, I left in the end of May. I teach the Wisconsin Rural Institute on Alcohol and Drug Studies every year. Have ever since I was about 2 or 3 years sober. I do a class there at Stout University with my father. We teach a class to professionals who are in the field of treating alcoholism and addiction that are not in recovery. We take them through a journey through the steps so that when they're talking to their clients, they know what the heck they're talking about. It's been a passion of mine for a long time. But so anyway, that's one of the great things we get to do. So we headed off to Wisconsin to do that. From there, we went to South Dakota, North Dakota, Montana. We saw a good friend of ours in the Bitterroot Mountains. We dropped down into Yellowstone early in the morning, and we got to see buffalo walk beside us on the side of the road. I mean, Dad could reach out and pet him. You know, my dad's, he's getting old, and he's doing some bucket list things, and I get to do them with him. I'm the driver, and I'm honored and privileged. Sometimes it's really hard to do that. But so I got to do that this summer. And so we did that, and we went to AA in all those states. And AA is alive and well in 11 other states besides Louisiana and Mississippi. I want you to know, because I was there, and I got to go to AA meetings with the cowboys in Montana. Woohoo! I had fun with that deal. And I got to spend 24 hours with my sponsor in Minneapolis, and here's how that goes. We have a rule, when we get together, we have to laugh, we have to cry, we have to dance, because she taught me I could dance sober, and we have to do some step work, okay? And so we have some things we got to get covered whenever we see each other, and that's what it is. And so we get up that morning. I get in late the night before. We get up early in the morning. Oh, and we got to ride horse. Yeah, I knew there was 5 things. And so we got up early in the morning. We went over, got the horses, saddled them up. We went for a ride. I rode this 3-year-old barrel racing horse that I'm in love with, and I want her to bring it to Louisiana. I haven't talked her into it yet. But we had a blast. We got home. We cooked steaks on the grill. We did some step work. We prayed. We did a lot. There was a dance going on in downtown St. Francis. We got down there about 8:30, and we danced every dance until they closed the doors at 2. And so we got it all done that day. Next morning, I got up with my dad. Met my dad, and off we went on the run on another trip. And so after that was all over, I got the privilege of When I was 17, I gave a child up for adoption, and I found him when he was 20, and I was in the last 3 months of my drinking. He got to meet his mother for the first time in the worst I'd ever been in my life, and he got to see that. And last year I brought my kids, my 2 older sons, together to raft down the Arkansas River. And it's tradition now. We do that every summer, and we've done it now for 3 years. Well, this year was very, very special. My youngest son, who lives in North Carolina, I want to say a quick prayer for everybody on the East Coast right now. My son, who lives in North Carolina, is right in the path of that hurricane, hadn't talked to me in 7 years. And he showed up in Colorado. And for the first time, my 3 sons were together. For the very first time ever. Ever. One of them's 34, one's 32, and one's 26. And I got to raft down that river with those kids. And if you'd have told me that would have happened 11 years ago, I'd have told you were stark raving mad. Absolutely mad. And, wow. It was I got to do just some more levels of cleaning up the wreckage of my past. And let me tell you, when I did the amends the first time with them, I thought it was cleaned up. At year 3, I did it again. I thought it was cleaned up. Year 6 or 7, again, I thought it was cleaned up. But there's so many levels to this deal. And so my son from North Carolina, we got to take a little ride on Skyline Drive. And that's where I used to huff that lighter fluid and paint. And we went up there and had a talk. He called me last week to tell me that he was starting college because I inspired him. Wow. I almost missed it. I almost missed all that. And I cry when I'm up here, and I hate it. I hate to see y'all going, But they're tears of joy. Please understand that this isn't tears of sadness. This is tears of joy. And Peg used to say to me, Diana, she said to me once, have you ever felt tears of joy? No. Is there such a thing? I didn't even know there was. I said, there isn't such a thing. Guess what? There is. And it's really, really amazing. And, I used to, the stuff that I shared with Peg over the years in my 4-step, I never thought I could say it to anybody ever. And, when I'm up here at this podium and I say, God, you're on, I have no idea what's coming out of my mouth. I just don't. I worry more about what I'm going to wear and, that kind of stuff. But I never worry about what I'm going to say. I just don't. Because I know I open my mouth, God's speaking, because I can't. Left to my own devices, I would be drunk and dead. And so I went from that trip. I left May, end of May, and I got back the middle of August. And I went from that trip. I came into Lamar, Colorado, and put my 96-year-old grandmother in my brand new 2011 Camaro. That's an AAIOU car with the sunroof, black leather interior. Cheapest car I could buy, so I bought it. And her wheelchair in the trunk. And I took her to Hawthorne, Nevada, where I was born, and where her first husband, my father, was buried. And what an honor that was. She was my mother to me, and I haven't been able to spend very much time with her in the last several years because God has had me very, very busy. And so I made the commitment, and I called her. I said, I'm going to take you on this trip, and we're going, and we went. And we had a great time, It may be the last trip she ever takes. I hope not, but maybe. But let me tell you, it ain't no fun trying to get somebody in and out of a Camaro that's in a wheelchair. And she outweighs me by about 170 pounds. So we're traipsing through the mountains of Colorado and Utah and Nevada, and you got to stop at wheelchair-accessible bathrooms. And you got to push her up these hills, and then she's dragging me down the hills, and we're just having a hootin' time. But we had a blast, and that was such an honor and a privilege. I would have never been able to do that. In a million years, I would have never been able to show up and do that. And I can today. And about 4 years ago, I ended up working for that treatment center I went through. When I got out, I started the Alumni Association for them, and it had grown to 3,000. And they called me back and said, will you come back and run this thing that you started and then ran off to Florida? I said, sure. And so I came back to work for my dad and run that Alumni Association. And I got back to Minnesota from the beaches of Florida, mind you. And he sold the place about 5 months later, and I'm stuck there in Minnesota in the freezing cold. He was on my resentment list that year. And so anyway, and there's a really wise woman in Minnesota. I don't know if anybody's ever been there and knows, but Cookie is her name. And she does a big book study with more women in Minnesota than anybody I've ever seen. And I was going to leave that place after Dad sold it. I was mad and da-da-da. She come in there. She said, you can't leave till you're happy. I'm like, gosh. So anyway, I stayed another 2 years. And I kept getting this call from Louisiana saying, this guy wanted me to come to work down here. And I'm like, I got the greatest job in the world, blah, blah, blah. About the 8th time, I'm like, all right, God, I don't know what's going on, but I'll go. And so I came down for the interview, and I really wasn't going to take the job. I had no intention of it. I wanted to come down and see my AA Louisiana friends because I know lots of people in Louisiana at that point. And so something moved me. I decided to take the job, and I ended up in Lafayette, Louisiana. And I was working for that company for about 4 months, and I found out there was a treatment center sitting over in Lake Charles, Louisiana that had been sitting empty for 7 years, and they had nowhere to send anybody to treatment anywhere. So I went over there and looked at the place. I just drove up there and looked at it, and I got on my knees. I said, God, is this what you brought me to Louisiana for? Because I didn't know, I wasn't clear what I was doing yet, and I got a resounding yes. And that was in July 2008. We opened that facility in October 2008. My dad and I and some AA friends got together, put as much money as we could scrape together, and got it going. And it's called New Beginnings at Lake Charles. Yeah. So we've treated over 500-something people there. And I got to design the program and write it. I'm the boss. I'm like, somebody's got to answer that question. Oh, it's me. I got to answer the question. I'm the boss. Oh my God. This girl walked out of that treatment center 11 years ago with no hope whatsoever of being alive right now. The psychiatrist had no hope. The counselors told me I was never going to make it. And, wow. And here I am. Still standing. still standing. And, so everybody in Lake Charles, they all give me grief because I'm a busy woman. I run, whatever I'm asked to do is what I do. Whatever the path of least resistance is where I'm at. I've learned if it's hard to get there, you ain't supposed to be going. I learned that very well. And so, I remember calling Peg early on when we got that place open and we were running out of money and cause 2 hurricanes came through and postponed our opening by about 2 months, called Ike and Gustav. And I wrote it out in the group room on a mattress watching the storms. I didn't know what to do about a hurricane. I'm like, there's hurricanes. And so anyway, I learned a lot about faith and a lot about prayer in that whole process. Cause let me tell you, on Wednesday night, I had no idea how I was going to make payroll on Thursday. And I'd walk out to that mailbox on a wing and a prayer and there'd be a check, just enough money to cover payroll the next morning. And I went on like that for months and months. And I was like, I called Peg one day and I said, Peg, I can't believe, or maybe this wasn't God's will. She said, Diana, how many people have you treated? And at that point it was about 100 and something. And I said, well, about 112 people. I'm crying. I can't make payroll. What am I going to do? She said, if it wasn't God's will, you wouldn't have treated one. I was like, whoa, how soon I forget. So, I'm proud to tell you that we are alive and well in Lake Charles, Louisiana, and we've touched over 600 lives, or right about 600 lives now. And, if you'd have told me that was going to happen 11 years ago, can you imagine what I'd probably spit at you or bit you or something. You told me that, so let's see. I got to tell you one more story. I'm going to close with this, and I'm going to read something. Now at the facility, at my facility, at the front door, there's 2 eagle feathers, and they're golden eagles. And I'm known around the country in some circles as the Feather Lady. I was about 3.5 years sober, and my son, the one that is now sober, went to prison. And the same day, one of my sponsees blew her head off with a shotgun, and I thought I was going to die. Pour me another drink, right? And so. I was just a train wreck, and I went to the Fellowship of the Spirit conference in the mountains of Colorado. If you've never been, you got to go. It's the last weekend or the third weekend, usually in July. It's a wonderful, wonderful conference started by Don P. out of Colorado. I used to be a trustee at large and a delegate for Colorado. And so anyway, I went to that conference, and there was a man there named Don C., Native American out of Colorado Springs. So we're about 35 years or 38 years right now, I think. He's one of my spiritual mentors, I call him. And he came up to me at that conference and he touched my cheek and he said, feathers are your blessing. And I thought, man, you guys are weird here. You say some weird stuff. And I didn't know what he was talking about. And so, I got back home and I had like 9 sponsees at the time, and they had asked me to take them on a spiritual journey through the Big Book. And so we sat down one weekend. We did 1 through 4. They broke to do their 4th and 5th steps with their sponsors, come back, and we did the rest. And so I was really not in very good spiritual condition. I was really mad at God, and I was really scared. And AA people were sleeping on my couch because my son had just gone to prison. I had to go help that husband. I didn't have to. God gave me the grace to help that husband dig his wife's brains off the ceiling of their house. And I planned her funeral. And AA came together and put that together for me. And it was the most beautiful event I've ever seen. I couldn't do it. I was a train wreck. I couldn't even stand up hardly. And so, I forgot what story I was telling you. Oh yeah. So about the feathers. So I come back and I'm doing this workshop with these girls, and I forget my cell phone up in my apartment. I run up there to get it, and on my mat in front of my door is a feather about this long. And I'm going, what? Who? Where? And this is probably about 3 weeks after that convention. I'm thinking something weird's going on. I picked it up, threw it in my big book, and off I went. And I told the girls when I got over there to do the workshop, I said, the feather thing, I found this feather. It's weird. It's right laying around on my mat. I'm on the 3rd floor of this huge complex, concrete complex. And so we go on. I tell them my feather story. The next week when we got back together, I had 2 bad alcoholics, crack addict prostitutes from the streets of Bradenton. Good ones, I'm going to say, not bad. And they both told me their feather stories that they had experienced that week. Those girls are still sober. I don't know why. I don't have to explain it today. But so all through the years, feathers come to me from all over weird. I have feathers from every country, Alaska, swan feathers. I have ostrich mating feathers. I've had about 9 eagle feathers now come through my hands. Passed all of them on, but the 2 I have hanging at the front door. My dad has one of them. Some of my sponsees that I've worked with over the years. It'll just move me. I'll know I'm supposed to give, and I give it. It's not mine to keep. This is not mine to keep. Right? So I'm in Colorado now, and I'm this last weekend, a couple weekends ago, and I'm driving on Highway 9 between Guffey and Fairplay, Colorado. I hadn't been back to visit that in all these years, right? I hadn't been in that area of Colorado in all these years. And all these memories are flooding me, and I'm talking to God. That's what I do when I drive. We're having a conversation, and life's been really, really busy lately, and a lot of crazy things are happening. And out of the sky comes an eagle. And he lands in the middle of the road and stops my car. I'm not kidding you. A golden eagle in the middle of a road, in the middle of the mountains of Colorado, right after I passed the Fairplay sign where those charges were held 11 years ago. And it stopped my car dead in its tracks, and for about 2 minutes we stared at each other. Me and this eagle. And I knew what was up. And, if I could tell you some feather stories, I had time, I would. And I heard a couple of really resounding things. One was, "Good trip, Diana." And the next thing I heard was, "Stop." Because I've been going 90-0 for a lot of years here, and it was starting to take a toll on me. And James knows I was spoken in Monroe, and so does Chet. Several months ago, I was sicker than a dog. And I've had some health problems this year, and trying to figure out. I just want you guys to know that turning 50 and going through the change of life is not for wimps. And we don't have hot flashes, we have power surges. So I'm having a power surge. And, so stranger things have happened. Now that eagle that stopped my car that day, that's not a normal thing. That's not something, eagles don't stop in the middle of the road and look at your car. They fly away as soon as they see anything. This was a golden eagle about 8 years old. And about a year and a half ago, one of the guys I treated was a Coushatta tribe member, and he brought me a golden eagle feather from an 8-year-old eagle. And it hangs at my front door, and they found that guy dead about 6 weeks after that. In his pillow, he had drank so much that he passed out in his pillow and suffocated because his brain wouldn't wake him up to breathe. And there was that golden eagle in the middle of the road. So stranger things have happened. So I want to close with this. It's from, I don't know where my glasses went, but that's the other thing that happens. Your vision just goes, boom, bye-bye. You're like, see ya. Oh, there they are. This is, I'm always very aware of, I just try to stay very aware, and I found this in my big book early. I haven't looked at it or read it in a couple of years, but it was Dr. Bob's last talk in Cleveland in 1950. And I was just reading it earlier, and I just want to read this to you because I guess this is what God wants you to hear tonight. He says, and one more thing, and this is at the end of his talk. None of us would be here today if somebody hadn't taken time to explain things to us and to give us a little pat on the back and to take us to a meeting or two, to have done numerous little kind and thoughtful acts on our behalf. So let us never get the degree of smug complacency so that we are not willing to extend or attempt to that help which has been so beneficial to us. To our less fortunate brothers, thank you very much. And to you, thank you very much.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Sobercast is ad-free, and we'd like your help in order to keep it that way. So if you'd like to help us be self-supporting by pledging $1 or $2 a month, visit Sobercast.com and look for the donate links. Thank you very much.